Hi, how are you? I know I've had a little bit of a move around because I was getting so many distractions where I was before. I thought I'd take myself off into another little place for a while. So going back to school, I've done a killer letter, and this one is obviously in response to the most fantastic help that we got from Suella Braverman. Now, it is, I think, possibly 9 pages, and I'm not going to go through all of it word by word, because obviously it's very difficult to make an interesting and jazzy YouTube video about a 9-page letter, you know, so you're going to have to forgive me. So what I thought I'd do is I'd do a little précis of the points, but more importantly, what I'm going to do is that if you want me to help you, I want you to email me, and I'm going to put my email address at the bottom of the screen. And I genuinely, at the moment, what I'm doing is I've been helping lots of people on a one-to-one basis, and I've been looking at their schools' websites, because certainly in England, they make it very helpful for you because all of their policies are available, so you can get into the nitty-gritty of what they're up to. Now, in Scotland, it's not quite so easy, and so I'm coming up with a different plan by working with some amazing Scottish women on that separately. And Wales, obviously, at the moment, they're going through, some incredible parents are taking a judicial review, so we're waiting to see what's going to happen in light of that. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing some spotlights in some areas that are happening in the UK, because it's become very clear that some areas are particularly problematic. So I'm going to do some spotlight videos working with some people who are particularly worried about what's going on in their locality. And that's with regard usually to the councils letting gender ideology rip, because working with all of these organisations. So in the meantime, hopefully you've had a look at Suella Braverman's speech. Sex Matters have done a report, a printout, so go and get that. But what I've done is I've done a combination letter. So I've gone through the Cass report, Suella Braverman's insights and explanations about the Equality Act and how they relate to schools. And I have also I've been put in all of the different relevant parts of the Department for Education's schools and non-statutory guidelines as that were already in place. So my position all the way through has always been, because this is a cruise liner which is never going to be able to be turned around in totality. Gender ideology sadly is always going to be here in some form or another, okay, because it's a global phenomenon. But what I'm arguing is that I want to step out of it, and helpfully Maya Forstater and Alison Bailey put us a number of steps forward in order to be able to do this. So I'm just going to read you some parts of this letter in order to try and give you some outline about what I'm going on about. Now, I always come at this as a kind of let's talk before we go ballistic. So I start off again. I'm writing to formally state my position in the spirit of having an open dialogue prior to any formal complaint process, because yet again I'm doing this as an educational thing, because most of them have no idea what's actually going on and what their actual responsibilities are. So I want to set out my concerns regarding the teaching of gender ideology to my child, and request that they are no longer taught any gender ideology that is framed as a fact, as is my right as under the protected characteristic of belief in the Equality Act 2010. Firstly, I believe that gender ideology to be a neo-religion that some people believe in and that others do not, and that I'm a gender atheist. So then I say, I shall explain my rationale and also touch on the relevant pitfalls of potentially unlawful policy and practice, and how this relates to my child in your school. You may well have circumvented this and updated your policy in light of the Interim Cass review, which I supply at the bottom, and the Right Honourable Suella Braverman QC MP, the Attorney General's helpful intervention on the unlawfulness of transgender school policies and the Equality Act 2010 earlier this month. And I put in that at the bottom amongst a whole load of other links, because obviously I'll send this by email. Secondly, I will be making arguments for teachers to refrain from teaching any unscientific and widely inaccurate information to my child, such as born in the wrong body, cis, or assigned at birth. So essentially I deconstruct the different components as they relate to gender ideology. I'll illustrate the different intersections because I'm aware that gender ideology is not confined to PHSE/RSE sessions, and is in fact proliferated throughout the curriculum and through policy in most schools. Now this is really important because obviously I'd also later on refer to Miriam Cates MP's really helpful Westminster debate on what was going on in RSE in schools, and I also attach a link to her speech at the bottom. But what we know, and in some schools this is genuinely horrific, in fact in most schools, I don't know why I'm even saying in some, what these LGBTQ lobby groups have managed to do explicitly is say that they want this put in every single lesson, right? So if you're under the illusion that you can opt out of this just by doing the normal, thing where you could say, oh, I don't want my kids to have sex education anymore, that's not a thing. This is genuinely in every single propaganda-filled lesson. So that's why I am throwing the cat amongst the pigeons and saying, and trying to use the Equality Act, because what they also have throughout their curriculum, and this is the bit which makes me just quite ill when I read it, is also the level of hatred coming from statutory bodies downwards, and councils specifically, and I have one in mind, where they're essentially saying everyone who kicks up a fuss is an absolute hostile and you must take action against them, right? So I'm going to do a separate video on the people that I'm talking about. And this is why I strongly believe that we have to take a stand against this and start using the Equality Act and asserting the gender critical the point. So I go through all the different cases. I then talk about the whole concept of correctly sexing and misgendering as that relates to Maya Forstater and Alison Bailey case. Some of these parts I've incorporated because this is like going bigger and better than the letters before, so some of it might sound familiar to you, but I'm saying you may be interested to note that although LGBTQ organisations provide these materials, it is schools who may face a legal challenge because the DfE makes it clear that you are legally responsible for the materials that you use and not the organisations or external agencies that you take them from. And then point them in the direction of the DfE guidelines where schools were reminded to be politically impartial, because then Suella Braverman picks up on that in her speech, and so I include the components of her speech that relate to this. I do quite a massive section on pronouns because this is the bit that the schools get really up in arms about, and it's one of the things that they really rant about and punish the kids. And it really does, I do find it incredibly upsetting because a lot of it comes down to really punishing kids with autism and special educational needs. So I basically talk them through any parent could have legal means to argue that you're in breach of the Equality Act 2010 in their non-belief in gender ideology as a protected characteristic. I said, I would not agree to my child being punished for correctly sexing. A, because my child cannot be compelled to lie. B, neither will I. And C, this has no legal standing in law in the UK. sex does, but gender doesn't. And then I explain the Stroop test in relation to selective attention and processing theory, which I then relate to children with autism. And then I tie it back into Suella Braverman's address on the position in terms of the law. She goes on to say, it's therefore wrong for schools to suggest that they have legal obligations, which mean that they must address children by their preferred pronouns and names. I mean, obviously, there's a whole spiel that I'm jumping over, but basically what I say is there's no law in the UK to support the political ideological shift to opposite sex pronoun use. In fact, it is a form of bullying for the non-believer to be coerced into gaslighting and having to play mind games. Gender ideologues put the responsibility onto others in order to affirm their identity. The non-believer may feel their rights under the Equality Act are being breached and feel threatened, harassed, coerced around pronoun badges and requirements for email signatures, etc. There are a couple of points where essentially this is a template. You can cut and choose as you wish. So then I go into gender-neutral toilets, because that is always a big, I did a video on toilets because I get so many questions on toilets, and it is a really, really important issue. So she did a really excellent clarification on toilets, and she says there's absolutely no basis for treating any child with a protected characteristic of gender reassignment as a member of the opposite sex. No boys should be accommodated in girls' toilets. Great. She said, yes, it is lawful for a mixed-sex school to refuse to allow a biologically and legally male child who identifies as a trans girl from using the girls' toilets. So then I go on to talking about teaching gender ideology throughout the curriculum, because this is the snaky bit that really I find incredibly difficult to work with. That the lobbying organisations are insisting that they put this gender ideology throughout the whole curriculum, and even in some of them are trying to embed it in the 0 to 5 category within nurseries. So what I'm saying to the teachers is, to the head teacher, it's important to point out that I am aware that you're doing this, and I am alerting you to the fact that I'm explicitly withdrawing my consent for this. And I'm aware that it happens in every lesson, pretty much, including things like biology and in computing, where they use examples like binary and non-binary. So I see this all as a safeguarding issue, because you would be failing to consider the level of social programming that's going on in this social hysteria. And then I go back into Dr. Hilary Cass's Interim Cass review, and what I do say, which you might not agree with if this isn't your view, but I say I'm incredibly pro-LGB, pro-sexual health, and pro-age appropriate PHSE and RSE. I'm never going to remove my child from good quality education. However, teaching children that lesbians should accept male-bodied people as lesbians and female-bodied people as gay men is simply homophobia. When will RSE and PHSE return to its mission of teaching relationships and sex education and well-being, rather than pushing children to be confused and down an adult pathway of medical and surgical harm? There were 5,000 referrals to the Gender Identity Clinic in London last year. So following the helpful intervention of Miriam Cates MP in her Westminster speech, she talks about the concerns and the indoctrination of children from these lobbying organisations. We must never teach relationships and sex ed in school outside of the context of respecting parents' choices and parents' values. And this is important, that these schools are, they're not in a position to be Stasi-like and telling us, what's what. They are not, they have not got ultimate control over our children to get away with blue murder. This is supposed to be a partnership. So if we're saying no, then they need to listen. So you need to just, just tell them no, and we need to fight it, because if we don't, they will just carry on. And the more of us genuinely that all trot in, because what they will do is they'll say you're the only one who feels this way. So the more of us who step up and complain about this in a structured, very informed fashion, that's why I'm doing this. That is literally why I just keep banging on, trying to recruit more and more people to it. Suella says, going back to her speech, since the Interim Cass report, schools must be sensitive to the fact that gender distress may be a response to a range of developmental, social, psychological factors, that something else is going on. So I keep, trying to illustrate to them throughout my lecture. I'm not just like having a mega whinge. I'm trying to explain, because I absolutely fundamentally know they're blind to what the bigger picture is. So I talk about the autism point. I mention a bit about detransitioners, and then I finish off by basically saying to them, so that we're on the same page essentially, because I also know they don't practice this. I talk about their public sector equality duty requires schools to ensure that they are balancing characteristics across the board, basically, and that the advanced equality of opportunity between persons who share relevant protected characteristics and persons who do not, and to foster good relationships between them. So the Education Act 1996 is a part of that says pupils are to be educated in accordance with the wishes of their parents. Another part of the Education Act, there must be, whatever they're teaching, they're offered a balanced presentation of opposing views, because I really do think they forget these parts that they're supposed to be working towards. The European Convention of Human Rights, Article 2, the state shall respect the rights of parents to ensure such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. Okay, and remember the UK is still signed up to the ECHR. Another one from there, the state is forbidden to pursue an aim of indoctrination that might be considered as not respecting the religious and philosophical convictions of the parent. So in summary, it is my formal request that my child is not taught any gender ideology as fact. It is a highly contested political ideology, and it should be taught like any other religion and respected as such. I've tried to offer you evidence, reasoning for my beliefs, and I hope that you will respect my request accordingly. Okay, that's that. So, email me. Let's do this together. I will help you personalise it. I will look at your school, depending obviously on the level of inundation I've got. Let's see how that works out. Let's go. Hi, how are you? I know I've had a little bit of a move around because I was just getting so many distractions where I was before. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more peace and quiet where I am at the moment. So, oh, for God's sake!